It's just this alone.
Yeah, to start with.
Okay, you know how to get. Okay, perfect. You're live.
Terrific. So good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Moore. Very pleased to be here this morning. It's been a very odd experience to come to church this morning because it's been so long since I've been, probably the longest maybe in my life. So it's confusing to me a little bit. I didn't really realize how I would feel, but I felt very tearful actually on my way into church this morning, and it surprised me. It surprised me just how soft I felt. I guess I've come to church my whole life for many reasons. One of them is consistency, which might just be habit, but it's been pretty consistent. But also for community, for connection, for comfort, and also for challenge. My hope is that all of those things are going to be happening for you now, that there'll be a sense of community and connection, some comfort, and also some challenge. My name is Steve Moore, and I mostly am interested in psychology. And when I was talking to my brother, who is a minister, about my idea to talk today, I told him it was going to be psychology and not theology. But when he listened to my idea, he said, I don't know, Steve, that's starting to sound a little like theology to me. And then I started wondering what the difference really is between those things. And since both things talk about our relationship with God, self, and others. And I'm going to talk about relationship today. In fact, the last time I taught anything here in this place was almost 6 years ago exactly, when I did a series about relationships. And I've really been thinking about this idea ever since then. And it's very personal to me. The idea that I've been thinking about has more to do with love than anything else. It has more to do with my ability to love or my ability to not love, or it has more to do with what I'm good at and not good at. And really, I'm better at talking about love than I actually am at loving. And that's what I began to struggle with as I realized that probably 6 years ago, I was pretty clear that if I just said love is the answer, nobody would argue with me. If I just said the answer to everything is love, that I could get complete agreement with that, and that would solve my problem. But in fact, it didn't. As a matter of fact, as I began to struggle with the notion of being more loving, I decided to run an experiment. This was just personal. This was me by myself. What I decided to do is I decided I would go to the Galleria, which is a shopping mall here, and I decided that I was just going to love people as they came by. And so I stood on the upper deck of a big shopping mall, and I leaned against the wall, and I summoned love by thinking about somebody that I loved. And I could feel it in my heart, and I felt love, and I decided I was just going to beam that love at every person that walked by. And as people began to walk by, what I realized is I did not love them. In fact, I didn't even like them all that much. Mostly I judged people. I was afraid of people. So I worked harder to summon love and to love people. And I noticed that I didn't feel much love at all. And finally, a nice lady came by carrying a baby in her arms, and I was able to summon some love for the baby. And I started to feel encouraged until, as the baby went by, he blew one of those giant green snot bubbles out of his nose, and then I didn't even love the baby anymore. And so what I found out was that it's very difficult for me to love. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to understand what the answer to my own personal difficulty with loving is. And I began to believe that it might not just be my personal difficulty, that there might be more to it than that. And so at the beginning of this year, I actually contacted John about the possibility of teaching a class on love, and now I've been thinking about it for a long time, about just some of the ideas that had come up for me, and I found out that they're not ideas that are unique to me. In fact, it turns out that a lot of things have been written and spoken and sung about love. As a matter of fact, words about love are everywhere. And I think that might be because, like me, we're actually more comfortable talking about love than we actually are doing the actual act of love. So we speak about it a lot. We try to define it a lot. We even ask questions like, is there love, or is love such a thing? I'm given to believe that there are probably 4 kinds of love that are talked about. I'm not going to talk about that today because really what that involves is some expertise. And also, it doesn't go to the thing that I'm talking about today, which is to love. To love. The actual act of. What it means as a human being to do that. And so I pondered this. I pondered this more and more about how to love and what are the blocks to that. Back when we were talking about it before, Brene Brown had been writing a lot about vulnerability, and I was sure that it had something to do with vulnerability. And so I began teaching and talking about vulnerability a lot, and I still believe that that's probably true and probably has a good bit to do about it. But still, I was a little unsure about how I was supposed to approach it and how I was supposed to actually talk about it. In the Bible, the love is talked about a lot, but one of the things that seems to be true is that nowhere in the New Testament do we have recorded where Jesus said the words, "I love you," to anybody. I'm not completely sure that's true, and I'll be happy to be fact-checked about that, but I believe that that's accurate, that saying "I love you" was not what was happening. Being loved and experiencing love was more of what was happening. And yet I'm given to believe that, in fact, Jesus loves me. In fact, one of the first songs that I ever learned in church was "Jesus Loves Me, This I Know." For the Bible tells me so. But I'm a little unclear about how it is that exactly we know that. One of the ways that I experience love here at St. Stephen's in the church that I go to is through a men's Bible study on Tuesday mornings, which I miss. Even though we're doing it on Zoom now, I miss. I happen to be sitting in the room now where that Bible study usually takes place, and I realized when I said that I really miss it. I miss being in this room with those men. But sometimes when I'm in that room, one of the things that I say to them is that I think the disciples were knuckleheads. And partially I do that to get a laugh, and it usually works. But also because the claim that I make is that Jesus, as he was teaching these men right next to him, the most common thing that he would say is, "You don't seem to understand what I'm telling you. Let me tell it to you a different way." Or at least the way I interpret it is he would often say, "Let me try again. It's like this." Or here's another way for me to explain it to you. Here's a different story. Maybe you'll understand it if I say it like this. And then in the end, it seemed that they often still did not understand. So in that way, I can claim to be a disciple of Jesus because I have the same sort of knucklehead problem, which is that I often am unclear about exactly what it is that I'm being told, or what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, or exactly how. And so I wind up just sort of boiling it down to, well, kind of do your best to be loving. Try harder, while often failing. And that's often where I've landed, is feeling like I was failing at love. And yet, in one place in the Bible, there seems to be some great clarity that we are to love one another. Love one another. That seems very clear to me. So how is it that I'm supposed to do that? And what I want to do with you today is see if we can experience that love together, to see if we can't find out what the blocks to that might be, and if indeed that there's something we can do about that. So here's the idea so far. I think that we are to love one another, and I believe that that's the one thing that seems really clear to me, and yet I find that many times it's more difficult than I imagined it would be, and I think I'm not alone in that. So in order to be able to work with this together, we're going to try to have a love experience together, and we're going to this is going to be something you're going to participate in, and we're going to do as a group. So I'm going to ask you to do the same thing that I was trying to do when I was at the Galleria. The first thing that I would like for you to do is right now is just summon the experience of love in your heart. And really the easiest way usually to do that is to think about someone that you love. A mother, father, a spouse, significant other, a child or a grandchild. Right now, summon the image in your mind of someone that you definitely love and allow that experience to move into your heart so that you have the feeling of love. And as you begin to feel love, I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And so feel love, but keep your eyes open and keep your eyes focused on the screen. And as you begin to experience, I just want you to maintain the love that you have in your heart. Just keep it. Just keep the love that you have in your heart. And we're going to intentionally do this in silence. It's only going to take a few seconds, but I don't want to influence you with music. So I just want you to hold the experience. So now, again, summon love. Bring that love experience up into your heart. And begin to feel love as you watch the pictures when they go by. So if you're like me, here's what the experience is like for me. Summoning love for me, I'm able to do because there are people in my life who I do love. And as I soften my heart, I'm able to feel that. I'm able to feel the experience of loving someone. But then, as I began to try to hold the experience, number one, it's difficult for me to do. But as I went through the pictures, at the beginning, the love experience with the babies and the puppies was not hard at all. But then the experience got harder. And there were some pictures that I was downright not loving at all. As a matter of fact, they were extremely difficult for me. And I noticed that my heart changed. And the language that I'll use is softening and hardening, because I noticed that my heart hardened in response to some of the pictures. And I noticed that my experience of love actually changed. Now, why, is that? Now, there's some logical answers, but don't go there yet. Instead, what I'd like to do is talk to you about, in general, the problems with loving, to love, as a human being. I'd like to talk to you about what those might be. And because they have to do with just being a human being more than not being loving itself. I think that there might be people who are particularly talented in love. Or maybe there are people who are particularly gifted in their capacity, to love. I don't think I'm one of those people, but I think that I have met and seen people who are like that. But we're all human. And because of that, we all have certain things about us that are true. One of the first things is that we as human beings strongly prefer ease over effort. This is about conservation of energy. Again, it's not a bad thing. It really is a good thing because if we weren't able to conserve our energy, we wouldn't be able to keep going. And so the truth is that we're always looking to find an easier way to do everything. The reality is that when I got here today, one of the things that happened as we were setting up to do this, everybody starts going, well, I think it'll be easier if you do this, or how about I think this will be better. So as human beings, we constantly are looking for the better way to do things, which is the more effective way to do things and the easier way to do things. But in the end, what that means is that we as human beings all prefer things to be easier. We all prefer things to be easier instead of effortful. In addition to that, we have a strong preference for comfort over pain, which makes really good sense. If a thing is painful, that means that's more threatening and more dangerous. And so we would really like for things to feel good and really not feel bad. You might even make an argument that every morning when I wake up, whether consciously or unconsciously, one of the first things that I do is begin to think about, okay, what can I do today to make sure that I feel good, or more importantly, not feel bad? So what am I going to do today to avoid pain and to increase my comfort? Again, not a bad thing. Not a bad thing, a very human thing. But beyond that, we strongly prefer security over risk. We would very much like for things to be safe, comfortable, and easy. And it's not that we can't at times override this. As a matter of fact, many of us do every day. We do things that are risky, that require a great deal of effort and may involve pain. As human beings, we are able to choose to do that. But that's not our preference. The preference that we have is for security and for comfort and for ease. And that really does make sense. That's how we survive as human beings, and that's how we are able to continue to go on. And so I'm not complaining about this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a strong argument to you that because this part of us which wants this for ourselves exists, that is the problem with loving. That there's a part of our brain or a part of our being or a part of humanity that actually is at odds with everything that it takes to do anything except for love that happens to be easy, comfortable, and secure. And maybe that's why we so strongly prefer love that comes with infatuation. Because it's easier and it's more comfortable and it seems more secure because you've got the power of infatuation. Or maybe it's because we prefer the love of small children or puppies because it's easier and it's more comfortable, it's more secure. Or maybe it's why we prefer love with contracts, even sacred contracts like matrimony, because then what we're trying to do is ease the risk that's happening in this relationship. But you know, that same part of us whose job it is to do this also knows the truth. Let's call this part of ourselves ego, just for now. That this part of me is also it knows the risk too. Even if I'm not admitting the risk to myself, this part of me realizes it at the same time. That if I love you, in the seeds of that also comes the possible loss that may come too. If I care about you, the risk of loss comes right along with it. Boy, that's a powerful thing to have to face. Someone told me yesterday that the seeds of sadness are in every joy. That makes sense to me. And the seeds of loss are in every love. And see, this part of my brain that's engaged in my survival, that wants things to be easier and wants things to be more comfortable and wants things to be risk-free, it would like to find a way to avoid that. Or make some sort of a deal that allows me to experience love but mitigate the risk. You know, what that does is it makes me very unlikely to love people. Who would have thought that? I mean, love is such a good thing. It's such a desirable thing. I want it so much. I want to love, and I want to be loved. These things I want to be true, and yet it turns out that part of my survival is not only getting love, but it's avoiding the risk of love. Both things going on at the same time. Talk about problems being a human being. I'm very challenged by this idea. I'm very challenged by the notion that to be human is to both want love and fear love. Marianne Williamson in her writings talks about there being only love and fear, but it's really interesting that it's not love or fear, which sometimes that's the way we end up translating it. We sometimes say faith or fear. We sometimes say or, as if these things can't coexist, but they're going to have to because I'm human. And my survival instinct is always there. My desire to be safe and to be comfortable and to be easy is always there. And so because of that, I'm going to have to work with that part of myself. But here's good news. There's more coming. While I was thinking about all of this, on the screen comes this from Dorothy Day. I really only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. I thought, how challenging is that? I really only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. I thought, well, surely that can't be true. Surely it can't be true as much as you love these, so you also love me. Surely it can't be true that I'm challenged that much. Because, see, that goes against everything that I want to be true. I want you to know there's people I love least. I mean, there are. And so if this is true, I'm like, well, why is this so difficult for me? What makes this be so hard? And then we find something even more difficult. Love your enemies. Now, people who are smarter than me in theology have got some interesting debates about who is your enemy and who is your neighbor and things like that, which I think is fun. It's really fun to talk about things like that. But, I mean, this seems pretty straightforward. First, I'm told to love everybody, and then if it says love everybody, you get to ask questions about who exactly are we talking about here. Well, and then it says, well, love your enemies. Love your enemies. How powerful is that? And I continue to read this as try as hard as you can, but continually fail. But I don't think that's the way that it's operating. Instead, what I think is happening is that there's something at work with my ego that's happening even now. That there's a softening agent that is at work, even as the hardening agent is at work at the same time. And that may end up feeling like death. As a matter of fact, what I've noticed is that when this softening comes in my heart, unless it's one of those very safe and very comfortable and very, very risk-free, easy sort of loves, that every time it comes, it actually feels quite frightening. And it also feels like there's a part of me that gets threatened, a part of me. What if we were to call that part the ego self, the self that is constantly building me to a defense, the self that builds a tower, or the self that builds a castle, or the self that builds walls, that says, I'm going to contain all of you and keep you safe. I'm going to keep you secure. I'm going to keep you comfortable. I'm going to keep you easy. And that part of me actually has to find some way to die. Well, I thought we were going to talk about love, Steve. Weren't we going to talk about love today? How did you make it all the way from love to death? It's starting to sound pretty painful. The only thing probably more painful is to live without love. And what we know is that as we see ourselves becoming less loving, that's a form of death as well. One that I don't think we as human beings can survive. But this death, the death of the small self, in favor of the true self, as Richard Rohr calls it, that's something that we can do. That's something that we are able to do, and that we're very fortunate not to have to do on our own. I'm going to read a poem this morning. I'm a latecomer to poetry in my life, which I feel a little sad about. I keep discovering poetry and poems that apparently everybody else already knew about. A few years ago, I discovered Mary Oliver, and I was super excited until I found out that everybody else seemed to know about Mary Oliver, other than me. The poet that I'm going to read to you this morning is a man named David White. And David White is a current living poet whose work has meant a lot to me, and no more than this particular poem. Keep in mind that I'm not necessarily asserting anything about theology with the opening line of this poem, but I really do want you to hear it. And then I'm going to explain to you why I think it's important in this context. It's called Self-Portrait, and it's by David White. It doesn't interest me if there's one God or many gods. I want to know if you belong or feel abandoned, if you know despair or can see it in others. I want to know if you're prepared to live in the world with this harsh need to change you. If you can look back with firm eyes saying, this is where I stand. I want to know if you know how to melt into that fierce heat of living, falling forward to the center of your longing. I want to know if you're willing to live day by day with the consequence of love and the bitter, unwanted passion of your sure defeat. I have heard in that fierce embrace, even the gods speak of God. I want to know if you're willing to live day by day with the consequence of love and the bitter, unwanted passion of your sure defeat. I have heard in that fierce embrace, even the gods speak of God. When I ran that one by my pastor brother, he said, well, I'm not sure that opening line about God and gods is necessarily going to be distracting. I said, well, really, what he's trying to do is talk about that the arguments about is this or that is less important than are you willing? So are you willing to, in the face of your sure defeat? And of course, that line speaks to everything that I've been saying here. Because love is risky. It's a highly risky, endeavor. It's not a small thing, it's a gigantic thing. And when it comes, it's going to cost me. When it comes, it's definitely going to cost me. So this is a painting or a piece of artwork. Burks is the name of the artist. I just found that out. B-U-R-X. Burks is the name of the artist. This hangs on my office wall. And it's a quote that's most often attributed to Charles Bukowski. But as I was doing a little research to try to do a correct attribution, I found out that it's actually Kinky Friedman is what this quote is. Find what you love and let it kill you. And then if you can see it, if you look down just a little bit in the eye underneath it, there's a word that says, it's okay. Find what you love and let it kill you. It's okay. Not everybody loves this art, but I do. I really think it's terrific, and I have two different versions of it hanging on my office walls because it speaks so much to this. It speaks so much to everything that I'm talking about. It's almost as if God found what God loved and let it kill him and said, follow me. And there's a part of me that's going, oh no, all of me that I think is me, it's going to cost me that. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is much bigger than I thought it was going to be. I thought I was just going to have to try to like people a little better. And I thought I was just going to have to see if I couldn't lean in and be a little bit more vulnerable with people. This suddenly got bigger for me. And I felt very daunted by the whole thing. I was like, man, this whole love thing, no wonder I'd rather sing about it or talk about it or do some definitions of it, because this is like super, super hard. I think I'll just go back to making up definitions, right? But then as I worked with it more, I started thinking, wow, but there's a love here that's conspiring with me in this. There's a love of God that is conspiring with me in this project, right? We're working this project together. As I began to, as a human being, try to be safe and build these edifices, God conspires to take them apart, right? And as I try to harden, there's a softening that comes. And I can participate in that. I have choice, of course, to be able to participate in that, but I'm not doing it on my own. I don't have to do this completely under my own will. Thank God I don't, because it's really too much for me. So I ended up thinking that love is not the answer, but perhaps to love is the answer. And that there's a how-to. And sure, compassion's there, kindness is there, being nice to people, liking people, all the things that folks who call themselves Christians aspire to and try to do. Not anything in the world wrong with that, because it's all pieces of it and parts of it. Vulnerability, yes, is a piece of it and part of it. But also death of the small self. The part of me that so much wants to contain, control. The part of me that so much wants to be safe, so much wants to be easy. That part of me is going to get taken apart. So the word soften versus harden is very important here. So I'm thinking that that there must be a way to love better, at least for me. Now, one of the nice things, I guess, about the space that we have right now is that I don't have to run into any of you in the hall so that you can look at me and see if I'm actually being more loving when I come in contact with you. Because I want you to know that thinking about this and working on this a lot, it hasn't seemed to increase my ability to love a dramatic amount. This has turned out to be a super slow process for me. I'm still highly defensive. My ego seems to resurrect itself on an ongoing basis, even as there seems to be this death coming to it. I mean, this seems to be a fully functioning, ongoing defense thing that's happening all the time. And so I've noticed that I don't really seem to be all that much more loving, but I'm softer. I'm softer than I used to be. And I'm more consciously engaged in the process to love. So I've really appreciated the chance to talk about this. It's been super important to me. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is, if there are any questions as they come up, I'm going to try to answer them. And I'm going to try to respond to any comments that have come across as they come in the board. I will tell you that while we're waiting to see if that's happening for me, please do ask a question if you have one in the comments. But one of the things that I did is I asked my wife, Pam, who's one of the people I think of when I'm conjuring love, I asked her to prepare a question for me, and I asked it, I wanted it to be a softball question so that it would be ready to go. And she said, well, tell me how you exactly are you supposed to be more loving? Or it was something along those lines. And I said, well, that's not a softball question. That was a really hard question. And I asked her to come up with another one, and she didn't. And so I've been thinking about that too. And mostly what I've decided at this point is that I have to be very conscious. That is, I have to be thinking of this. I'm calling up the work that I am doing, because when I go unconscious is when the ego resurrects, when my defense mechanisms resurrect. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to do as best we can to be conscious and aware that this is work, and there's work that I am doing to love. If it's easy, that's fine. If it's easy for you, that's fine. But I'm working, and I'm thinking there might be a question.
There was a comment.
Oh,
from
comment.
earlier.
Michael.
Right.
Let me see.
Just this right here.
Michael says, loving oneself appears to be something very different from loving others or loving God. Maybe loving oneself is not love at all. My friend Michael, who is in the men's Bible study, who's very good at expressing love to others, questions whether or not loving oneself is a part of the deal. And I think that it's all one thing. I believe that my capacity to love, and I think that's what Dorothy Day was pointing to, I really believe that my capacity to love is one thing: God, self, and others. So I really believe that I only love others as much as I love myself. I only love myself as much as I love others. I only love God as much as I love all beings. So I truly believe that it's one capacity that we're talking about. And I get to experiment with it. Perhaps the reason that we're here in relationship with each other is because I absolutely get to experiment with my capacity to love with you. And as I expand that capacity to love others, maybe that makes me more capable of loving God and loving self. So I'm looking at it as expansion of capacity by disassembling of a defense mechanism. That was really nice of you. And I remember how to spell your name. So we have, I don't know where we are on time actually. How am I? 9:37. So we have a couple more minutes. If there's somebody who really wanted to say something or have a question, I'd be happy for you to do that. And if not, I'd also be happy to be done as well. Are we feeling like we have answered all of our questions and done everything we needed to do? What do you think, Becky?
Don't see any other comments or questions
Good.
coming in, but if there's anything else you would like to add, or
No.
maybe you could share with people the title of the David White poem.
Oh,
They
yeah.
might be interested in looking that up later.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Becky said about the title of the David White poem. I'll do that really quickly. Self-Portrait. Portrait is the title of the poem. David White, from a book called Fire in the Earth. David White is W-H-Y-T-E, and that's Self-Portrait. It doesn't interest me if there's one God or many gods. I want to know if you belong or feel abandoned, if you know despair or can see it in others. I want to know if you're prepared to live in the world with its harsh need to change you. If you can look back with firm eyes saying, this is where I stand. I want to know if you know how to melt into that fierce heat of living, falling toward the center of your longing. I want to know if you are willing to live day by day with the consequence of love and the bitter, unwanted passion of your sure defeat. I have heard in that fierce embrace even the gods speak of God. David White. David White. And let's see.
One more comment.
Yeah.
Brendan.
BP. The seeds of loss are found in love. My friend and brother BP called that a gut punch, and he knows that it's true, that all love contains in it the seeds of loss. And the part of our humanity that I'm talking about knows that that's true as well. And that's what it's trying to protect us from. The Dorothy Day quote, I got it, is, I really only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. I'm a social worker, and so Dorothy Day's stuff often speaks to me.
We have a little delay with the
Yeah,
question
yeah.
feed, so just,
So one of the things that's happening as the questions come in is there's a little delay. So BP says, how is it that this concept continues to be an ambush? Acceptance is in order for me daily. Yeah, and I think that the answer to that is in my humanity. I really believe that that this is not a bad thing. It's not a failure on my part. To be human is to attempt to be safe, and to attempt to be easy, and to attempt to be comfortable. That's a survival mechanism. So remember, my ego is working for me to produce this result, security. It's not working against me. It just turns out to be against risk. It just turns out to be against risk. So I don't want to, I really don't want to end up, I think I may have too, ended up like judging myself too harshly for not being that loving, because really this is just something that we're going to have to work with, but not alone. Not alone, thank goodness. Let's see, seeds of lost found. That is so good, such good stuff. Well, since I don't see anything else coming up here, and I don't want to just sit here, doing dead air time. I want you guys to know how good it has been to have the opportunity to be with you, and even this way this morning. And I also want to say that I look forward to the time when I can shake your hand and hug you in the not too distant future. I sincerely hope. And may you be blessed and experience love today. Amen.